Help me to welcome our next panelist for the next issue spotlight. We should not need any Yoda tricks, I think, for this conversation. We have a chance to reflect on the opportunities to create shared value through gender equity. And as we know, shared value can be created through products and market innovations, through value chain innovations, through ecosystems investments. And I'm thrilled that this afternoon we'll have a chance to talk about the first two of those with our panelists. As CEO of Banco BHD León, we welcome Stephen Puig here. His bank has garnered market share and customer loyalty by anticipating the banking needs of women. It's Dominican Republic Bank, and through the financial security that has been provided to these women, they're driving towards parity and accountability and opportunity that have not been realized before, also driving a competitive advantage for the bank. So welcome, Stephen.
Thank you.
As co-founder and CEO of WEConnect, Elizabeth Vazquez has worked with dozens of multinational companies, many of you in the room, to identify women-owned businesses all around the world who could participate in global value chains, driving, again, economic opportunity and greater stability in the value chains of some of the world's largest companies. So welcome, Elizabeth. So we're going to explore why gender equity is a competitive strategy in and of itself. At the end of our comments, there will be time for questions, so fire up your Slido website, and we'll turn to those questions in just a few moments. Stephen, can we start with you? Tell us about how BHD León recognized the opportunity to serve the women's market and what it's meant for the bank's business in terms of growth and profitability.
Sure. Well, about 5 years ago, about 5.5 years ago, the bank launched a credit card, which was a women's credit card. Usually when you mention this sort of product at a conference focused on gender, you see a lot of eyes roll because they say, well, what is this, pink washing, or are you simply taking a credit card that has no genuine value proposition for women and calling it a women's card? That was just before I joined the bank, I should say. But it wasn't actually pink washing. There was a genuine value proposition behind this card. It, for example, covered cervical cancer, breast cancer, which, although it's not entirely 100% unique to women, it primarily manifests itself in women. And seeing that this card had had very good acceptance among customers there, we asked ourselves whether or not we should do something that would be much broader ranging across all of our customer segments and across all of our products. So we delved into that to see what we might do in that sense, and looked for partners that could help us explore that possibility. We identified two: the Global Banking Alliance for Women, which is an alliance of banks Elizabeth and I have participated in. We're actually participating on the board now of that particular organization, which fosters the development of programs such as this among commercial banks throughout the world. And also the IFC, part of the World Bank, had developed a team that accompanied banks that wanted to go on this sort of journey. So we hired the IFC team, and we worked on this for about a year, and identified a huge opportunity in terms of our business. Essentially, we looked at the demographics both for our country and also globally, and realized that women make 80% of household decisions, both in our country and globally as well. Women in our own country are graduating at much higher rates than men, and garnering many more honors in universities than men as well. We saw other stats, such as the fact that among SMEs, women in our country own 22 to 44% of SMEs. Unfortunately, 22% related to those that are the larger ones, and 44% of the smaller ones. And as a universal bank, which does business with customers that range from micro-entrepreneurs to those that have project financings, we were keen to see what we might be able to do in all of these segments. So we embarked on about 6 or 7 months worth of market research, and tried to understand those things that motivate Dominican women as potential bank customers, both as heads of households as well as leaders of small businesses for the most part as well. And we launched our program, and in terms of results to date, it's been something that's exceeded our expectations. We came up with a business case that had an internal rate of return of over 100%, and we have actually been reaching the returns that we had anticipated in our business case since then. So it's been a very satisfying experience for us in terms of the business that we've grown.
Wonderful, wonderful. Did Did you want to show us a quick video?
Oh yes. Aside from the business impact that that this program has had, it has also helped us reach segments that we didn't anticipate we might be reaching. For example, I think one of the big challenges any bank has in most places is how to reach millennials. And last November, during the International Day Against Violence Towards Women, we launched this particular campaign that we're going to show on a video now.
In the Day of Violence Against Women, the Bay León Bank set out a simple task: teach women how to identify possessive men before getting involved with them. The interventions were done in the main universities, where the young female population is at an age of formalizing their romantic relationships. In a matter of hours and in an organic manner, the action became a trending topic, becoming the main subject of the debate of how violence can be disguised as love.
Este es un tema que no se le puede dejar a las autoridades. Tenemos que involucrarnos todos. ¿Qué vamos a hacer? ¿Seguir contando muertas? No.
So through this campaign, we were able to reach university students, which are a difficult target for us as a traditional bank. And this is in addition to the business that we've garnered with our existing clients. We've grown the number of customers that we have that are women customers from 345,000 to 500,000 at a growth rate of approximately 13% per annum over the last 4 years. In addition to that, the number of products that our women banking clients have has grown from 1.94 to over 2.2 per customer, which is a lot in our business. And the number of actual products sold to our women customers has increased from a little over 600,000 to about 1.1 million products per year. So, you know, we've grown the regular business, and in addition to that, through this initiative, we've been able to reach other segments that have been more difficult to reach in the past for us.
Outstanding. Thank you. Elizabeth, many of the small businesses that Stephen was referring to are just the kinds of businesses that you're working with. Help us understand the shared value argument for companies to channel their sourcing through those companies.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's such an honor to be here with both of you and all of you to have this conversation about gender equity and inclusive sourcing in particular. And I think there's a slide just so that it's understood that this isn't a passing trend. These are corporations that are spending their time and money to create a nonprofit called WEConnect to find the world's best suppliers. Right now, they spend $1 trillion on products and services. About 1% of that is with women-owned businesses globally. That's a huge business problem that we have to fix. Think about it. You just told us that women make or influence over 80% of the consumer purchasing decisions. They're about 1/3 of the world's businesses. We're half the population, and it's not good business to not include your customers in your value chain as your suppliers of products and services to anticipate the needs of your market. So yes, there are huge CSR or social benefits to being inclusive in sourcing practices, but this is business. These companies want to continue to be the most profitable. They want to have the access to the best suppliers, the innovation, They also need their communities to grow. They need companies that are agile and that will create jobs. Again, to create a consumer base and a good base of employees and leaders. And so there's a huge opportunity here if every organization was more conscious of their purchasing power, how we spend our money. We want to talk about shared value and opportunities to increase equal opportunity and sustainable growth and inclusive growth. All we have to do is start with how we spend our money. It's really not that complicated. And so this is a really exciting time where these companies are looking at their value chains. And it's not just with women in businesses. It's all underutilized communities that aren't engaged. It's people representing ethnic diversity or LGBT communities or people with disabilities. Any community where they have an interest in those leaders to be successful in starting and growing businesses and creating jobs is a market where they need to be active, and they need to let those communities know that they're open for business, that we buy from you, you buy from us. This is business, it's trade, and we can do a lot of good work together in the process.
So while the percentage of purchasing from women-owned businesses is small, can you give us some examples so that we know these aren't sort of cute microcredit arrangements, so that we can understand the scope and the scale of some of these partnerships?
Sure. So we're doing a project with the World Bank. They just became a corporate member because they too have purchasing power all over the world and influence. And so we're doing a project with the IFC in Bangladesh, and we needed to map what are the women in businesses in Bangladesh doing, what products, what services, and what are the corporations in Bangladesh buying, what products, what services. It was really, really interesting. I can't tell you the number of women in businesses we met with who have, yes, several of them had hundreds of, a lot of them were sole entrepreneurs, but a lot more that we met with were employers of hundreds of people. And then of course I met the woman in business who has 20,000 employees in the garments industry. And I thought, wow, that's pretty exceptional. But then I was in Singapore last week and met with one of the Walmart suppliers. She's making 62 million garments a year. These are businesses at scale, owned by women, controlled by women, managed by women, and just knocking it out of the park in every sector. And I was in Mexico last year we did a buyer-seller conference. We work with women in businesses in 100 countries, and we have local representatives in 25 countries. And in our Mexico conference, and you have to be careful what we assume about women. I have to be careful with that. There was a woman making plastic manufacturing, and another doing steel manufacturing, and another who did male urinals, which I thought was interesting. And then a textiles company. I was like, oh, you know, she's got the garments out and the pillows. But shame on me, because the Hilton representative who was hosting us, the buyer walked by her booth. She was the only one that got a contract that day, because that buyer wanted those pillows in every room, and then asked her, could she do the runners on the beds? And by the way, could she do matching curtains? And then there are things that they needed throughout the rest of the hotel. And if that contract goes well, there are other Hilton properties that might also be interested in what she's offering. So it's really exciting when we don't underestimate the potential of the contributions of underutilized communities.
Yeah, those are great examples. So you're both in positions to help grow these businesses. Stephen, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how the bank seeks to serve those women business owners who are looking to take their businesses to scale.
Sure. In terms of our approach, we look to serve them not so much through specific products, although I will mention a few products in a second, but through value propositions. So our work with IFC led us to focus on value propositions for women as heads of households, as well as heads of business. And in addition to that, the work that we did to set up the program led us to was also to change the way in which we approach women customers. Traditionally, we were a bank that focused on pushing and selling products as opposed to having a consultative sale approach and listening better. And what the research in our country showed us was that women wanted to be accompanied in important financial decisions, business owners included, as well as heads of households, because these were important decisions for them, and that's what they expected from their financial institutions. And I have to say, to this day, even though we've been at this for a few years, this still remains one of our biggest challenges, is convincing our sales force to change the way they approach women customers in terms of the sale itself. Now, having said all of that, in terms of products that we've been offering and services, we came up for women that own businesses with another credit card that's focused on their business needs, which provides basically assistance through one of our partners, Mafre, which is the largest Spanish insurer, one of the top 10 in the world. We have assistance services that are offered for things such as taxes or handling employee issues, et cetera. It's kind of a one-stop initial shop for consultations that they might have as business owners. I see that one of the key things in shared value is partnerships. That's one of the key partnerships that we've had. Another one has been with multilateral institutions. Elizabeth just mentioned the IFC. Again, they've been a good partner for us as well. We developed funding for women-owned businesses in our country that wasn't readily available recently, which is long-term, fixed-rate local currency lending, something that typically doesn't exist in our country and other developing markets as well. And more recently, the IDB, another good partner, has also provided us with a $50 million facility, which is going to have a specific gender emphasis as well. It was approved a few months ago. We expect to sign that in the next few weeks. And it also includes technical assistance for ourselves to get an external certification from EDGE in Switzerland in terms of what we're doing in terms of gender. And then lastly, I'll mention a third partnership, which has been a partnership that we've done with local universities. We've established 3. These universities have SME centers that were sponsored by the government initially. We're the only local bank that has become a partner in these as well, taking advantage of these partnerships to be able to train women-led businesses so that they can be more successful in their activities.
Outstanding. And Elizabeth, obviously you're working with these business owners as well to help bring their businesses to scale. What are some of the mechanisms that WEConnect can provide to help scale those businesses?
So I think it's interesting. I think in the women business owner community, or the women's economic empowerment community, historically we've been very focused on access to finance, and it's mostly been microfinance and training at the grassroots level. And all of that is extremely, extremely important because we have to build a pipeline. But we also have to look at those businesses that are growth oriented, because what we need most in any country that I go to are jobs. We desperately need jobs. We need SMEs that are willing and able to take the risks to grow their companies. I find that when women have contracts with the corporations we work with, the banks tend to chase them. Investors tend to chase them. If they don't have sales and they don't have contracts, they're in real trouble. So I think we've had it a little bit backwards. We've done a lot on the finance and the training. We need to do a lot more, and you're a great example of what can be done and what must be done in all these different countries. But at the end of the day, these companies need to have sales. And so I do hope that in working with the various partners in this room, with FSG and everything that you've done, with Win-Win Strategies, with a lot of these organizations, the GBA and others, that we can do a better job of linking access to markets with access to finance, and linking that with the right type of training that really helps to scale. And then of course with IBM, with how do we leverage technology as an entrepreneurial enabler? But it's an ecosystem approach. You cannot do one thing and expect to have impact that's measurable at scale in our lifetime. But I do think if we can just leverage our purchasing power, it's a really, really good start.
So you both have sort of alluded to the organizational change that might accompany some of these commitments. And I wonder if you could talk more about that. What are some of those organizational or normative barriers that you might see in organizations that you're really working against? And how can our audience start to identify those and work on those inside their own organizations?
Well, I think that in terms of our culture internally, the first thing that we tried to do was to communicate how the gender initiative was aligned with our strategy. And if you look at our strategy, we have a simple temple design, the roof being what we try to do to serve our customers, which is basically, as a bank, to help them develop their good ideas, whether it be sending their kids to college or whether it be starting a new business and developing that business. And if you look at the temple that we have, it has 4 pillars. The second pillar is growing our recurring business. And when you have 42% of your clients who are women, I think you tend to be pretty aligned then with having some sort of gender initiative if you want to grow your business. So getting that out of the way, then the challenge for us in terms of cultural change is making sure that we had leadership throughout the institution for the initiative. I was very fortunate. Our chairman supported from the outset, the vice chairman, our board as well. And then what we did was set up a cross-functional team representing all the areas of our institution to lead the initiative. And actually, against the advice of one of our external advisors, we've kept that in place until now. Instead of designating a vice president for gender or having this managed in HR or PR or some other area where I've seen it managed elsewhere, we have this team that continues to meet to this day monthly to see how our results are going. And I think that's worked fairly well. In addition to that, I think something that's very important for this cultural change is to have consistency in what you're doing. I remember when we were about to launch 4 years ago, we heard a rumor that another bank was about to do something in terms of the gender space, and we got nervous temporarily, and then we just stepped back and said, hey, you know, we've been at this for a year. If somebody's really going to do this, it's going to take them a while to develop something that's sustainable. And then on top of that, you have to be consistently in the market. And we drew up a chart of everything that we were going to do for the following 12 months, which is something we've continued to do on how we're present month after month, either bringing one of the value propositions that we were developing to market or building upon those after we launched them initially, and also commemorating certain key dates throughout the year in which gender is relevant. And then lastly, I would also mention that to foster behavioral change, we've also sought and been a leader in some of the certifications that are offered in the gender space. Our country, following UN guidelines, has launched a certification called Igualando RD. In December, we were the very first company to receive the certification. And it's offered on 3 different levels: bronze, silver, gold. So from the get-go, out of the gate, we reached the gold level, which is a big satisfaction for our team. But at the same time, it establishes that commitment to maintaining this sort of focus throughout the organization as well. And that's why we're also looking forward to other certifications, such as the EDGE certification.
Great. And Elizabeth?
So I think for us, it's an interesting time to have to match macroeconomic dynamics with on-the-ground, micro-level engagement at the grassroots level, and then everything in between with a true value chain approach. And the reason that's important is because we have, I think it's over $63 trillion global GDP, right? So there's tons of money out there, but women are literally invisible in those value chains and generally do not own the world's assets. And it's really hard to build assets in an asset-based lending environment if you don't have assets in the first place. So it is, while entrepreneurship isn't the answer to poverty alleviation and inclusive growth, we won't be able to do it effectively if we don't look at who are the growth-oriented businesses in those communities. And I think it's interesting, just with all the different friends that are in this room and with Secretary Clinton coming, I mean, WEConnect, I think, embodies a lot of what could be done when the public sector, private sector, civil society, and the women themselves come together. And I say that because when we first started in 2009, the first grant we received as a 501c3 actually came from the State Department. And the Clinton team said, we need to make this happen, and there's urgency to this. Let's do a pilot in Peru. So we did that, and then Chile, and then Costa Rica, and then Mexico, and then Central America. And because of that work, the Rockefeller Foundation said, well, what could we do in Africa? So then it was Nigeria and South Africa. And so it's because we are looking at how can we bring the stakeholders together, but then on the ground, you really have to work with the local chambers of commerce, the associations of women business owners, the government agencies that have already found some of these businesses and developed their capacity, but they don't necessarily have connections to actual markets to sell their stuff. And so it's very interesting to have to pay attention to that entire spectrum of dynamics in such a fast-paced global economy, and yet if we don't do that, we're going to miss out. So right now, just with WEConnect members alone, right? If it's 1% of spend, that means $10 billion. To double that spend to 2%, but that's $10 billion worth of products and services, income going to women who in turn will employ people and know how to get those contracts to be able to get from 2% to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6. And so it's also systems changes. It's the ability of corporations to track their spend with the communities they care about. So you actually have to look at their vendor management systems and be able to flag things and see trends over time. So there is a lot going on, but it's not rocket science, and it's really great being a part of that journey.
Yeah, that's great. One of the questions that's come in that's similar to one I was going to ask is really the role of the board. And Stephen, you mentioned the support you got from your board chair and the vice chair. What do you see the CEOs need from their boards when it comes to driving gender equity through the organization?
Well, in our case, it was that initial to go ahead with the program that we had presented to them, and then on top of that, to continue supporting what we've been doing. I think that at that level, that's what basically we need. I will say, in terms of our board, we have a board of 15 members, of which 4 are women, and I think that the other thing that we need at the board level is for gender equity at the board itself. So, 4 out of 15, it's not bad by many other standards that we've seen, but there's room for improvement there as well.
Great. And another question that's come in for Elizabeth: how do you see this opportunity varying by region?
Yeah, so I think that's the funny thing about having just been in Bangladesh, where everyone said, "Oh, it was so hard. Women are so small, and the corporates aren't going to care, and the government doesn't get it." And I found the opposite to be true. We've had a really hard time in Europe, where everyone stands behind this privacy protection laws. We're not allowed to ask who's a woman-owned business or ethnically diverse business, so we just can't do it. Whereas you go to Bangladesh, and we met with these women-owned businesses. They're like, okay, we want to take a part of this. We want to buy from each other. We want to get into global markets. And then we met with the CEOs of the largest holding companies in the country. These are massive global conglomerates. And these men said within 5 minutes after we explained what we do, they're like, yeah, we get the business case. Do you have a database? Happy to buy from women. We're not probably buying from women right now. No one's ever asked us about it. Happy to do it. Can you make it easy for us? Do you know where these women are? And then, of course, we'd be happy to consider them. We won't give them a contract because they're women-owned, but we'd be happy to invite them to compete. So for me, it's just been really, really interesting, the assumption of where we thought this work would be super easy and well received, and then other places where we thought it would be super hard, and in fact, it's being embraced as an opportunity for inclusive growth for everyone, and they get it. So it is different. It does depend by country and by region, but it's been a surprising journey.
Wonderful. I think we've got time for maybe just our last question. There's a great one that came in. Looking ahead 5 years, where would you like to see the industry in terms of financial services, or the large companies sourcing from women business? What do the next 5 years hold for us, do you think?
Well, in our case, since we've been fortunate to participate with the Global Banking Alliance, we have our finger on the pulse of what's actually happening in our region. When we first joined the GBA, there were, I think, 2 other banks from our region that were members, one in Costa Rica, and if I recall correctly, one in Mexico. And we've seen that number multiply 2 or 3 times. So I think that we're actually, in our particular industry, the commercial banking industry, because this happened in microfinance years ago, 20 years ago, where at least half of the micro entrepreneurs tend to be women in our region. But in commercial banking, it hasn't been as prevalent. But I think it's something that's taking off, and in the next 5 years, I would anticipate that we'll see many more banks that are interested in doing this. We ourselves, myself and some of my colleagues, have acted as mentors through GBA to 3 or 4 other institutions in our region that are taking this up. So I anticipate we'll see a lot more of this.
So if I could wave a magic wand, I would like to not be in business, not have to certify that these are women-owned businesses, and introduce them to buyers because they already know how to sell into these supply chains and they're being actively sought after. Realistically, I would love to have 1 million women-owned businesses in our database that are providing all types of products and services in more than 100 countries, and all of you actively engaged, leveraging your purchasing power, and making sure you have access to the world's best suppliers. So I think just starting with the FSG community, that alone, even though there's a lot of overlap with WEConnect already, but that alone would have a huge transformational impact. And I think we need to do it with urgency because there is so much money sitting on the table, and we need to make sure that these businesses have equal opportunity to compete and win.
Thank you. It's clear the shared value framework provides plenty of opportunity for any organization to think about gender equity as a competitive strategy. We will not wait 5 years to ask this question again. We will look forward to following the progress along the way. But please join me in thanking Elizabeth and Stephen for their contribution.